that way?
I think I've just been saying Karsher.
Oh, no. Karcher.
Sorry. Can I mute the council chambers? Or will you mute yourselves? Muted. Okay. Well, I see Ms. Prince has her headset on, which reminds me I should put on mine.
I forgot mine at home today.
Well,
my dog ate my headset.
All right.
I'll not do it again.
You had a dog.
Right. It happened. I mean, might not have a dog.
Although a lot of people are suddenly popping up with dogs. It seems like the COVID thing to do. So if you did, I wouldn't be surprised. Okay, so it looks like based on what I'm seeing here with participants that we have a quorum of council members on board, and I'm expecting the remainder of our folks to roll in here in a moment or two. We have a lot to cover today. We're hearing from OFS Debt about our debt report, and then also from the Office of Financial Empowerment. So given we have a full agenda, I will call our budget committee meeting to order. Good morning, folks. Today, as I mentioned, we will have a report from OFS, our budget report, our debt report, and borrowing. Our OFE crew is here to talk with us today as well. So I think we have, I'm in the unenviable position of trying to make sure that we get through this dense material before the end of our time, which is slated for 11:30. We've been pushing out till 11:45 just to make sure we cover all of the important questions that come up, recognizing also that we can bring you back if we need to, and we can follow up with questions offline. We will start with Mr. McCarthy for OFS. We have Mike Solomon in the wings, and Munir Karcher-Ramos will be presenting for OFE. So with no further ado, we will get started with Mr. McCarthy, unless Holly has anything to add before we go. Ms. Houston, no? Okay, then Mr. McCarthy, thank you for being here today. We look forward to your presentation. And you're muted.
Good morning, council members. Can you hear me now? Mic check, thank you. Appreciate it. It's only been 6 months. We'll figure it out. Can folks see the presentation that I have up here?
Yes, we can. We can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So good morning, council members. I'm John McCarthy from the Office of Financial Services. This morning, I'm going to give you an update on OFS, the impacts that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on our budget and operations for 2020, also some highlights of the changes in our 2021 proposed budget, and lastly, some updates on new OFS initiatives. So I wanted to start this morning with our org chart to highlight the variety of services that OFS provides. There's the standard work, I think, that everyone knows and thinks about when you think of the finance department, including accounting and budget and treasury divisions. But on top of that, OFS also includes a lot of work outside of that kind of traditional finance vein, including real estate and assessments, our energy coordinator, the business support team, which manages and optimizes the Infor finance system, the Dale Street Garage and Como Shop operations in our fleet division, and the most recent addition, the Office of Financial Empowerment. And as Council President noted, Director Karcher-Ramos is here to give a more detailed OFE update later this morning. And all told, we have 84 FTEs spread across 4 locations in the city, or I should say 4 locations in normal times. Right now, we're spread kind of scattered throughout the metro as folks are working from home and adjusting to COVID. Some basic facts about OFS, some basic budget facts. We're a small department in the general fund, making up just about 1% of the city's overall general fund budget. And the majority of our budget is actually in special funds, including large citywide budgets like the assessment fund and the internal loan fund. Looking at what the department spends money on our general fund operations, they're similar to most other general fund departments. We are mostly salaries and benefits for employees at just about 90% of our general fund budget. The special fund gets a lot more variable as you look at the variety of services we budget for. It includes things like the internal loan fund, fleet equipment and motor fuel purchases, and the pass-through of assessments in the large assessment fund that's budgeted within OFS. So a lot of things that live in the OFS budget that really serve citywide functions and don't kind of add to our, our specific sort of service spending. This is the total OFS general fund budget. I'll get into some more detail on this on subsequent slides, but at a really high level, the 2021 OFS general fund budget is about $400,000 less than what it was for 2020, which is just about a 9% cut from our current budget. OFS's special fund budgets like real estate, fleet, and treasury are largely unchanged for next year. There are no major cuts, but also no room to make new investments as these budgets are largely dependent on the work of other departments, kind of responding to the needs of other departments. Moving on to our 2020 update, like every department in the city, OFS's budget and operations were significantly disrupted by the COVID pandemic. We've changed our operations at all levels of the organization. Our office staff were some of the first teams in the city to successfully transition to full remote work. We adapted our operations quickly and stood up some limited on-site services like printing checks twice a week to make sure our vendors can all still get paid on time. And then our staff that cannot work remotely, specifically our fleet division and then also the City Hall Annex maintenance teams, both of those groups have had to develop new protocols to be able to safely do their jobs on site. On top of the many operational changes that we've had to make, OFS staff has also supported all of these major citywide COVID response initiatives that you see here. Every one of the programs that are listed here, from the Bridge Fund to running 2 budget processes simultaneously, to this major citywide HVAC replacement project that we're involved in right now, took an enormous amount of work from OFS staff. So I do want to take a minute to recognize and commend the OFS team for the hard work and adaptability that they've shown this year, and really, taken everything that's been thrown at them and been successful in this crazy year. So really appreciate the work that the OFS staff has done this year on these projects and many others. So the economic downturn brought on by COVID stressed our department budget clearly. So we took a number of measures to control costs in 2020, starting by keeping several positions vacant for either all or part of the year. We also looked to our special funds for ways to help the general fund. We were able to save on the general fund side, just from vacancy management, just about over $500,000 in savings. And then by working with our special funds, we were able to save an additional $153,000 by having the City Hall Annex reduce rent for 2020. So it was another way that our special funds were able to contribute to the overall general fund problem in 2020.
And Mr. McCarthy, that was something we negotiated with Ramsey County. Is that correct?
Council President Brenmoen, this is actually, so we pay the county for our rent in City Hall.
City Hall, right.
But City Hall Annex is all managed by city staff and is rented all to city staff except for the county sheriff as well. So we reduced the rent to all city departments within the Annex this year. So we were able to save money from, parks, OTC, HR, the major departments that are located in the Annex.
As soon as I asked that, I was like, wait, it says Annex, not City Hall. So did we increase? We just balance it out by increasing the sheriff's rent, or what?
Council President Brenmoen, we build a little bit of a fund balance in this operation specifically so that we can take care of maintenance projects when they come up, emergency and planned maintenance. So we dipped into fund balance this year, which just, it just means that we have to kind of spread those future maintenance costs a little bit thinner when we have to do projects. It'll take a little bit longer to do those projects, but given the crisis that we were under this year, it felt like an easy way for the City Hall Annex to help out a little bit. So
great, thank you.
Great questions. Yeah. In building the 2021 budget, we were focused on preserving jobs while also meeting our budget target for the year. And so we were able to mostly do that by eliminating some currently vacant positions, including the deputy director over the accounting and business support divisions, the innovation manager, and a vacant innovation analyst. We were also able to shift a treasury position to a special fund, which created general fund savings, but also required eliminating a vacant special fund treasury FTE. So while these reductions don't impact people's jobs, there will be impact on the services that we provide. The deputy director role, I think in particular, will be a challenge. As I said, this position manages or had managed the accounting and business support divisions, and there are a lot of places where those two teams need to collaborate, and they have kind of task handoffs between the two groups, mostly involving the city's finance system, and that work is just tougher to do without a shared supervisor over the two groups. So that's just something that we'll have to adapt to this year. On the innovation side, obviously with a smaller workforce and leaner budgets, we know there's going to be high demand for process improvement projects around the city. And so while we did eliminate these two vacant positions, we were able to add set aside resources in the citywide technology and innovation fund for service redesign projects next year. So that we'll be able to use that fund to help support existing innovation staff and help kind of manage through these reductions for the year.
Great. And Mr. McCarthy, Ms. Naker has a question.
Sure.
Thank you, Council President. Mr. McCarthy, I'm just trying to understand the difference. I feel like we've seen both of these things, holding positions vacant and then eliminating positions. And my understanding is that holding positions vacant is just not filling them for the year. But when we have the funds to fill them, and eliminating them is just getting rid of them entirely. Can you clarify here which one we're talking about with the innovation team?
Sure. Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Naker, that's a great question. And I think as we talked about 2020 operations, we were really talking about holding positions vacant, and some of them we held vacant for all of the year or part of the year. We're still posting some of them this year to try to still fill by the end of the year. But as we moved into 2021, we shifted into actually talking about eliminating positions, where we said, okay, we held these vacant for the whole year of 2020, hoping against hope that somehow the economy would rebound and we'd have a better picture for 2021 as we built the 2021 budget and still don't have clarity on a better revenue picture for next year. We did eliminate these positions from the budget. Yeah.
So just as a follow-up, Council President, I'm a big fan of the innovation team, and I'm just concerned because it seems like this leaves us with just one person, our chief, on the innovation team without support. And I'm curious as to whether that's the case, and whether we're, rather than just kind of leaving the position vacant for 2021, what the rationale is for deciding to do away with those positions completely.
Sure. Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Naker, so we do have two innovation staff. So we have the Chief Innovation Officer and also an innovation analyst, Rachel Walsh, who works out of finance. So the second innovation analyst that has been vacant all year, we are proposing to eliminate that. So we'd still have two staff, but I think your point is an important one. And as I said, a lot of our decisions were around meeting our target and preserving existing jobs. And the size of our target was such that the only way to do it would be to eliminate pretty much all of the vacant positions that we had. Otherwise, we'd be talking about staff layoffs. And while I agree that the innovation team is really important, and we have benefited from them within OFS quite a bit as well, we're going to do what we can to manage with the citywide innovation fund and the remaining two staff for next year. But all of these, across the city, I know the positions that we've been talking about on these morning meetings are tough to bear, and we hope that as the economy improves, we can be strategic about where we can add back in the future.
Thank you.
Moving on to the Treasury staff reduction, eliminating this vacant position also will limit our ability to respond primarily to department requests for kind of non-core service projects. So things like new electronic payment projects, training opportunities and enhancements for service enhancements for departments. OFS met the rest of our reduction target by realizing savings from an accounting position where someone's going into a kind of a phased retirement and reducing hours next year, and then eliminating some budgets in our kind of line item reductions to our professional services budget. And so I'll end with some quick updates on some programs that OFS has invested in over the last few years. On the real estate front, in the 2019 budget, we created an energy internal loan program to do energy retrofit projects on city buildings. Since creating that program, we have completed projects at 18 fire stations, 9 libraries, 4 rec centers, and we have 25 more parks projects in the queue right now. The work that we've done today has mostly been LED lighting upgrades, and it's resulted in annual energy savings of about $81,000 per year. So it's been a huge success, and there's a lot of pent-up demand, and so we're going to continue that program into the future. On the facility side, a few years back, we hired, obviously, the consultant to do our facilities condition assessment of all city-owned buildings. In the 2021 budget, we have resources to continue that work and actually study the way that we maintain and manage city buildings around the city. So there's a team led by OFS real estate staff and parks staff, and they actually have just released an RFP for a consultant to help us do that work. So similar to how we studied citywide fleet a few years ago and changed the way we manage vehicles, our hope is that we'll, spend the remainder of this year and into next year studying the way that we manage buildings with some recommendations for improvements into the future.
And by this, I think we've had some dabbled in this conversation a little bit, like, does every department need its own HVAC people? Does every department need its own custodial crew? And are there opportunities for some efficiencies? I know we were working, I'm very anxious to clear out Fire Station 11 down in Railroad Island that is currently serving as a maintenance facility for the fire department, which, hat tip to them for figuring out how to make a 3-story building built in 1840 a maintenance shed. But there's a painting area, there's a woodworking area, there's a metalworking area, and it just struck me as strange that we just don't have a painting department in the whole city. So I appreciate that we're looking at that. Ms. Naker.
Yes, along similar lines, appreciate that we're looking at this. And just wondering, Mr. McCarthy, do you think that facilities management study might lead us closer to our goal of the 10-year citywide facilities capital replacement plan all in one place?
Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Naker, that's a great question. I think we're taking a little bit of kind of an agnostic approach going in, wanting to bring someone in and say, please give us recommendations, please look at what we do now. And, it could be a phased approach where we look at maintenance first and then kind of capital planning, or, I think that's a key and important piece. And I think most operations, as I understand it, similar sized cities typically have maintenance and capital planning under one roof. And I think that could be a great outcome, but we at this point are wanting to see what, the team of experts might recommend. And we've got a whole team with staff from all of the major departments that have buildings, and so it's a lot of people with a lot of different types of uses and needs, and so we're trying to make sure we meet all of those needs of all those different departments. But that's absolutely something that we're going to ask the consultant to look at for sure.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, it's exciting work. We're excited to finally get it underway. I know we've been talking about it for quite some time.
I just know I'm among my people when we call stuff like this exciting work.
Right.
Woohoo!
It's,
party time.
Exciting.
All right. So great. So are there other questions for Mr. McCarthy? You said this was your last. Usually there's like a questions slide,
yes,
so I don't want to.
I did want to just quickly give a couple fleet updates which I'll run through quickly here.
Wonderful.
Just we are working on, this is year one of our plan to convert our passenger fleet to electronic vehicles and hybrids. So we're buying 10 EVs and hybrids per year for the next 5 years so that we can phase out the gas vehicles for hybrid and electric. We have just completed our fuel software and data system upgrades, which means that all of fleet operations, including public safety fleets, are now on the same data and fuel system. So that's kind of a key first step to getting a better sort of centralized look at our entire fleet operations across the city. And then this year, we're also looking at doing equipment leases, which is something we traditionally do not do for fleet, but given the kind of historic low interest rates and some mounting maintenance costs on really old vehicles, this was a great way to get some kind of much needed boost to our ability to replace equipment this year. And then the last thing I'll add is just on electronic payments. We've got a goal in OFS of increasing the electronic payments that we take from our customers. And clearly this year with the pandemic, that's only increased our need for being able to accept those. So we've been partnering with some key departments to be able to expand those offerings. For example, this year, Como Zoo is launching online and kiosk payment systems to allow us to schedule reservations and accept visitor donations. We expect that that's not only going to offer more convenient payment options, but also actually increase the amount of donations we get every year, just as it's much easier, obviously, to do with a credit card than, depending on what you have in your wallet at the time that you show up at the zoo. And then we're also working with DSI and Water to accept electronic check payments for permits that they process through the Amanda portal. So some great work that we've got going on in OFS right now. And yeah, with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
I'm always glad when I hear us talking about this innovative idea of taking electronic payments. Just because obviously we're just so far behind the curve. My teenagers deal almost entirely in Venmo, so it's like their expectation is there by our constituents and by the everybody in the city that they have that ability to pay online. So moving in that direction is great. And I also do want to just underscore I know that we have, fleet is something we puzzle over quite a bit, and we have, vehicles in our fleet that are well past their prime. I am concerned about the safety of our employees sometimes. And I know that years ago we joked about changing the Public Works color scheme from whatever it was to rust and white so that we didn't notice how rusty their vehicles were. But even as we were looking down at sort of end of the year, contracts that we could get out the door, I saw in forestry we have 20-year-old tree trimmers, an over 20-year-old 1-ton truck that's driving around, and I know the way that they move around, they must have tons of miles on them. So these are just the kind of things that are not on the the forefront of the conversations about what we're doing in our budget. But I think these are examples of other doing something push off. Yes, the car still runs, but are they fuel efficient? Are they safe? Are they do they break down a lot? I mean, those are really important questions in terms of we're saving money by not buying new ones, but on the other hand, are we losing money by vehicles not working the way that they should be? So I'm glad to see we're moving forward with the electrification of the passenger fleet, but I also do feel like we need to continue to really push on our fleet. And I don't know, I'm kind of looking to Holly. We've typically had a report from Fleet. I feel like it's been a while since we've heard from them. And I know that many members of this council have wondered when we're going to add our fire department and police department into the overall fleet plan. So I'm wondering if we can expect a report from our fleet department, recognizing that we don't have a whole lot of money to throw at any issues that they surface for us. Would you or Holly have an answer to that about fleet, John?
I don't know that we have, Council President Brunmo, and I don't know that we have one scheduled, but I'm sure Fleet Manager Shane Morris would be happy to come and present. We talked a little bit about these kind of key updates that he wanted to make sure you had information on, but he's got way more detailed slides on all of these and more, and including plans for how we can roll public safety into kind of a centralized view of fleet and what a long-term plan there might look like. And also, share your same concerns about the pace at which we replace our aging equipment. So we're really happy to be able to take advantage of the leases this year to just pump in some kind of quick investment because you're right, the maintenance cost on these exceeds the interest cost of a lease, so it's like a no-brainer to use them this year for sure. But yeah, I'm happy to work with Mr. Wurst and come back for an update if the council would like that.
My assumption, and it's always bad to assume, but I think that just given where we're at in this year's budget process and what we would be able to, as I mentioned, like even do with information from Fleet, that it's something that can probably wait till our policy sessions in the winter or the early part of spring. But let's get that on the schedule definitely, because it's been a while since we've had an update, and I know Fleet Management started off to a strong start, and I just don't know if we've had an update since then. So it'd be great to hear where we're headed with that department group. Are there other questions from any of my colleagues? Got eyes on all of you for hands up, and I do not see any further questions at this time. So thank you, Mr. McCarthy, for your presentation, your report, the effort that it takes to get this together in a digestible fashion for the council. It's very helpful. One thing I would just say, kind of, and this is maybe teeing up more policy sessions, sorry, Ms. Houston, is just when we talk about the city budget, our work is so reliant on staff budget. And sometimes I think it'd be interesting to see like other comparable work that happens, in the private sector that's more like, what does that same kind of pie graph look like for other businesses that are very staff reliant? I know that there's probably no other entity out there that is the same as like a city or a county, but how does our type of budgeting challenges compare to private sector challenges? Because sometimes I hear folks say, you should run this like a business, and it's like, well, in a way it's not a business, it's a service, and we have to run it differently, but maybe looking at things side by side would help clarify that. So it could be something just in the never-ending quest to try to more thoroughly understand our budget and the challenges we face, that could be something we could unpack a bit in our policy sessions. So and maybe I don't even, I'm saying that kind of off the cuff, but as I was looking at it, it's just a similar theme that comes through in all of our departments. It's just so much of it is staff. And I think that's the nature of the beast, but it would be interesting to have a comparison. So I do not see other questions. So we are going to shift gears and move on to Mr. Solomon. Thank you so much, Mr. McCarthy.
Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, Council President Bremo and council members. I'll do my best to share my screen here now. Did I do that successfully? I don't believe I did. Here we go.
There you go. There you go.
Perfect. So thanks for having me, Michael Solomon, City Treasurer in OFS. I'm going to introduce the city's debt manager, Sarah Brown. Since she lives this fund, we're going to attempt to do a little bit of a back and forth here on some of these slides. I know that might be challenging in the remote dynamic, but we'll do our best.
Mr. Solomon, I have Ms. Brown as are you going to be the only one presenting on the screen?
No, if it's, presenting, yeah, but if it's possible for her to speak, that would be.
Yep, absolutely. I just wanted to, I have her put down in the attendees section, so if she was going to share a screen, I needed to change that. So welcome, Ms. Brown and Mr. Solomon.
I'll do my best to drive. So our slide 2 here is just a little bit about what we do in debt. Debt is pretty much half of the treasury function. The other side deals with cash, banking, investments, and those pesky electronic payments that Mr. McCarthy was speaking about. But on the debt side, we have a broad role in managing the city's existing debt. We also serve kind of in a consultant role with the Port Authority, Housing Redevelopment Authority, as far as their debt issuances. And then as part of the Joint Property Tax Advisory Committee, we do the joint debt report every other year, excuse me. So those are important roles we play. But really, you hear from us pretty often as we work to issue debt instruments every year, funding the city's capital budgets, and looking to do that in the least expensive way possible. We talk about those interest rates. Some of the big goals that this group has had in the past year is really maintaining our ratings. We'll talk a little bit more about our high AAA bond ratings. Keeping the city's large debt portfolio in line here, about $500 million in outstanding debt. and then making all of our payments on time, dealing with our regulatory requirements, and maintaining our positive investor relations. The third slide here shows the city's rating history. Brief reminder, having our high bond ratings means we can have the lowest interest costs as we issue bonds every year, get a little bit more for our money every time we're in the bond market. The city's had the AAA bond rating from S&P since the early 2000s. The outlook has been stable, except a negative outlook change in 2018 and 19. That was related to our portion of the state's pension liability. And the pension reform legislation that passed in early 2020 kind of alleviated those concerns, and we were reaffirmed at a stable rating outlook. Just a reminder that it's not only our debt that counts here, it's also our contingent liabilities such as pension and other post-employment benefits. The main focus of rating agencies now is obviously the COVID pandemic and the pressures that places on city finances kind of across the country. Our friends across the river in Minneapolis recently went to the bond market to fund their annual capital projects, and they did have their outlook changed to negative due to the pressure that's been on the finances there. Sarah and I have had preliminary conversations with our rating agency analysts regarding the city's 2020 positioning as well as the 2021 budget proposal. And we really did receive positive feedback at this early stage. So I just wanted to mention, kudos to the mayor and city council for the work to date on 2020 and 2021 budgets, and hopefully that will get done on that proposal.
Mr. Solomon, I see Ms. Naker has a question, and then I will have perhaps have a follow-up as well. Ms. Naker.
Thank you, Council President. Mr. Solomon, as you know, I try to use these debt presentations as a chance to learn as much as I can about debt, which is not my forte. So appreciate your patience for these questions. Are stable and negative, my first question is, are stable and negative the only two ratings, or is there a bigger scale for what outlook can be?
Yeah, thank you, Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Naker for the question. Right, so there's a whole scale of ratings, AAA being the highest. The outlook can either be negative, stable, or positive. You can't have a positive outlook on a AAA rating because there's no higher rating. So basically what the negative indicates is the rating agency signaling that there is more likelihood of a downgrade in the next year than of an upgrade. So that's how they kind of use that. A positive would be an indication of a better chance of an upgrade than a downgrade.
So at AAA, stable is the best we could be outlook-wise.
Exactly right. We always ask for AAA plus, but they leave us here.
Reminds me of my middle school science teacher. She never went above me. And then just curious, can you remind us what goes into our credit rating? I know we've talked about the amount of debt, obviously, that we have on our books compared to our overall ability to pay that debt, but are there other factors that go into that we can control and that we can't control, I guess?
Yes, Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Naker, that's well stated. That's exactly how they look at it. There is a whole scorecard approach, and there's some factors that we can control and some that we cannot. The economy is a very large portion of that. Obviously, the tax base that we're using to repay the debt is important, and that's obviously something that we can't control here in the city. There are the state-local dynamics, certain restrictions such as levy limits. That would be a negative hit to our rating, and so that's another dynamic that we don't necessarily control. Things that we do control are our own financial management, our own financial performance, how well we're doing as compared to our budget. They're looking for things like structural balance in our budgeting every year, not utilizing fund balance. When we talk about fund balance, liquidity is an important part of that score, and you hear us talking often about our 15% fund balance policy. So sticking to that is very important. And then our own debt load, which includes bonds. They like to see short amortizations on our bonds so that we're paying off our debt quickly. But then there also are portions that we don't necessarily control, especially in Minnesota. Our pension obligation is tied directly to the state's pension system. And then other post-employment benefits is another contingent liability that they kind of hold against us. So we can provide the scorecard if it's helpful. I think it used to be a slide in this presentation, kind of shows that breakout for you.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. So if there's no follow-up questions, I can turn it over to Sarah Brown, like I said, the city's debt manager, and we'll see if we can do the technical aspect here for her to run through the city's outstanding debt portfolio.
Thank you.
Good morning, council members.
Morning.
So slide 4 here shows the city's outstanding debt portfolio totaling roughly $480 million. The top half here is the city's general obligation debt, which is primarily paid for with property taxes. And the bottom section is the city's revenue debt, which is paid for from a variety of other revenue streams. As you can see, it's kind of split 50-50 between the two. And for this presentation, we will be focusing primarily on the general obligation debt, which is the top half, or in other words, the debt that will be repaid from property taxes. Next slide, please. Slide 5 here shows the city's target general obligation debt service range of 32 to 36 million annually. The green bar is the target range, and the dark blue line is the city's projected annual debt service going out through 2031. The range accounts for and is driven by, 1, the city's planned annual issuance of 11 million capital improvement bonds, as well as 12.5 million of street improvement bonds, as well as the goal of maintaining a AAA rating. Next slide, please. This is the city's...
Ms. Brown, before you move on, I see Ms. Naker has a question.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Council President. And going back, Ms. Brown, to the previous slide, I'm curious, and we had some conversation about this, so not to bury the lead, I think I am personally, and I think others of us on this body are interested in discussing what limits us to the 11 million and the 12.5 million in our GO and our capital improvement bonds or our street bonds, respectively. But I'm just curious how this green box gets established. Does that not change, for example, as our city's overall taxable capacity grows, or our city's budget grows in terms of dollars over time as we with inflation and as our levy goes up? I mean, how does that green box relate to how much capacity we have to pay?
Yeah, Council President Brendmoen and Councilmember Naker, if you don't mind, I'll take the question quick, and I know we're going to cover this kind of in future slides. What this target range really shows is what we have built into our model that's on the next slide. We talked about capacity. There's legal constraints, which leave us quite a bit of capacity to issue bonds. There's the rating agency constraint, which I think, as you noted, in some cases is tied to our economy and ability to repay, and so that provides some leverage. But as we'll show on the next couple slides, the real constraint on our ability to issue is actually revenue to repay the bonds and future revenue needs within this fund.
Okay, so I may have more questions on the next slide then. But
Okay.
Thanks.
And I'll let Sarah keep going here on the first half of this slide.
Sure. So this is the debt model, or the 5-year plan for the debt fund, focusing specifically, as I mentioned earlier, on our general obligation debt. The first 2 lines that you see here on the spending side is the city's debt service for the next 5 years, with some future issuance built in, back to that 11 million for CIB, as well as the 12.5 million for streets. Below that, you'll see the financing side. This is what Mike was getting at. And this is a mix of property taxes as well as a variety of other revenue streams. That blue line highlighted there is our budgeted use of fund balance over the next few years. And Mike can go further into that as well. He's going to address the property tax increase below.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So as noted, this top expenditure line is tied to that kind of target debt service range, and that does build in only our existing debt and that planned annual future debt. So you can see there the property tax proposal need in this fund for 2021, as well as those kind of ongoing inflationary increases, I would call them, that are kind of needed to bring this fund into balance over the long term. And we obviously model out more than 5 years, but this is a good time range to show the council, we believe. Notable here is the significant use of fund balance each year. And so what we're trying to do is kind of balance that drawdown of the fund balance, again, with keeping those property tax increases at kind of an inflationary level each year. Notably, this is just a plan. Things change every year. We have important tools such as refinancings. We'll talk a little bit about that on future slides. But just noting for the council that, just to fund the bonds that we've already issued and those planned amounts at 11 and 12.5 million for CIB and streets respectively, that will be coming forward with asks for additional revenue in this fund for the next few years just to fund those obligations. You'll note that there isn't a line there for additional property tax. We have in the past done one-off issuances, and I think the most recent example was the Ford capital improvement bonds needed to fund a very small portion of that redevelopment budget. And the way we would approach the one-off asks in the future is we would add lines to this, effectively showing that every time we are issuing additional debt outside of our planned issuance and target range, that it would have an associated additional revenue need to repay the debt.
Right. And I think, though, as Ms. Naker pointed out, and we've talked about several times, like when we stick with the exact same amount of our debt or our issuance for our CIB, road reconstruction bonds, we're essentially putting in less every year because it costs more to do the work. And this established $12.5 million just simply isn't getting us very far anymore. So I'm interested in learning about either in concert with the Port Authority or in just given the low interest rates, what kind of wiggle room we have here, because we just have a lot more even an increase here doesn't even get at how far behind we are in our street reconstruction work. And Ms. Naker has a question. I know that she and I have talked about this quite a bit.
Yep.
Ms. Naker.
Thank you. And not to rehash our whole conversation here, because I know we've been talking about this in these meetings too, but I guess, I'm curious as to whether, Mr. Solomon, how we know what that wiggle room is above the $12.5 million for street bonds, for example. I mean, do we have conversations with our creditors, with the rating agencies, where we are just trying to establish what additional bonding would do to our credit rating? That's one question. How we would ever know, we've been stuck. I don't know how long we've been stuck at 12.5 million for, you probably know, but it's been since I've been on the council, and I'm sure long before that. So I'm just wondering how we would ever kind of budge past that ceiling. And then the other question, just very practically, the additional property tax line for 2021, the 1.05 million, is that we're obviously not increasing our levy, so that is just already accounted for. That's additional dollars. When it says additional property tax, I guess, what does that mean?
Yeah, Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Naker, thank you. So we've been doing 12.5 million since about 2006. So that's the first answer. And there's a little bit more complexity to that answer, but we can provide that offline. The second part of your question regarding capacity, we can certainly do analysis with the rating agency. There's some metrics we could do in-house. They also offer kind of scenario analysis. And so we're certainly open to having that conversation. Notably, and I think it was said, their first question is going to be, how are we going to repay this debt? And so that's where, a multi-year plan to add additional resources to this fund, similar to that Ford line we see there, would kind of be a first step, I think, in moving those conversations forward. We need revenue, most notably property tax, to repay property tax-backed debt. And obviously that conversation is a little bit harder in a year with a 0% levy increase for the max levy. But, I think this group is open to having conversations with the council and Public Works and other departments to put together a plan for what those spending priorities are and what that repayment would look like.
Just, Council President, quick follow-up on that. So obviously, we have a 0% increase proposed for 2021, but I guess I'm wondering why that would impact ability to repay debt that we would potentially issue in 2021 and not have to repay until future years. I think the city has shown admirably its willingness to increase its levy in other years. So I don't think we have a history of flatlining. So I guess I'm just wondering what the implications of the 0% are this year. And also, is there any benefit in issuing the debt in a year when the interest rates are so low?
Yeah, Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Naker. Sorry, I did skip that aspect of your question. So yes, in a 0% levy increase, this would represent shifts from other line items in the property tax levy. So you do have that right. So that was a portion that I missed. Apologies there. And I think you're 100% right. Any bonds that we issued likely in 2021 would have repayment beginning in 2022. So I think there is a possibility of that. Just again, noting the kind of current need for inflationary increases, we would just need a plan and kind of commitment from, of course, the administration and the council to kind of factor those increases in at the time of issuance, so we don't end up with these kind of unfunded spikes or increases in the debt service going forward, if that makes sense. Just kind of trying to bring this into structural balance as is, and then adding on resources for any additional needs. So I think it would be a multi-year plan we could run some numbers on and look at for future years.
Great, thank you.
So moving on from that slide 7 here just shows some of the year-over-year major revenues and transfers. You see that the property tax, as discussed, the sales tax allocation for this fund does go down by $750,000. That was discussed a little bit last week, so I just wanted to spend a moment on sales tax. That reduction is not really tied to anything specific, such as some of the refinancings that we'll talk about a little bit later. But due to the revenue drop-off we've seen on sales tax, this was a little part of the solution there that not as much could go to this fund in order to keep other priorities funded in that sales tax budget. As we talked about last week, we kind of have not seen as much of a revenue drop-off as expected. We're thinking maybe those stimulus payments could have been a big part of that, so I think that was important. And so just wanted to note that aspect of our budget here on sales tax. The other line item I wanted...
That's wonderful. I think I saw someone do the math the other day and said that stimulus check amounts to about $5.18 a day at this point. So maybe.
And hopefully we won't see the impact of that going the other way as we move throughout the year without further stimulus, but something we're keeping an eye on for sure. The other line I wanted to note here is the assessment line item. That's going down by $100,000, and we'll likely see that continue. That is due to kind of the council's policy goal of reducing assessment rates tied to our street projects. So every time we do reduce the assessment rate, we need more property taxes to repay those bonds. So we historically had been north of 20%. We've seen that assessment percentage come down between about 10 and 15%. So we're likely to see a continued drop off in that annual revenue for this fund.
Ms. Naker.
Thanks, Council President. Just Mr. Solomon, down on the use of fund balance line, I know that we have a 15% fund balance policy, and I think we have 6 million or so above the 15% in fund balance right now. Just wondering, as we use fund balance, what the impact is on our credit rating if we are using from the fund balance that is over and above our 15%. Does that strike them as dipping into fund balance, even though it doesn't go below the amount that we've held as our policy, or does it not matter?
Yeah, so Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Naker, this line is within the debt fund, so it's kind of separate from that fund balance analysis we do annually for the general fund, which counts library and city general funds. There is a debt fund balance policy that we talk less about. It holds about 7.5% of our fund balance in reserve, and that's related to kind of future, basically next year's debt service expenditures, things like that, to ensure we do not default on our bonds. And so this is a spend down of the unrestricted portion, like I showed on that debt model slide. In reference to the general funds fund balance policy, we have the 15% policy. That's very good for our credit rating. They'd like to see us follow that. But as we often note, many other AAA cities are typically in the 25 to 35% range for fund balance. So while it's good to have a policy and follow it, we're also I guess, significantly below the fund balance that other AAA cities are holding. So it's kind of a balance, to your point. We have some flexibility. We get points for following our policy, but we're also already kind of below the benchmark for AAAs.
It's good to know we have more than one fund balance.
Yes.
I did not know that. Great to know. Okay, thanks.
This slide 8 just kind of shows the major spending and financing mix for the fund. Things that I'll note on the spending side is that we use a variety of tools, I think, as Sarah showed in that outstanding debt. Using revenue bonds as well as our GO debt is pretty unique in Minnesota and something that we've had a lot of success with. And then on the financing side, only about 20% of this repayment is funded by taxes. So that's pretty notable that we're utilizing all those other revenues, example being sales tax for the most part. We're using those other revenues to repay debts that, like I said, in other jurisdictions might be covered by property taxes. Also, I'll note the small 1% administrative cost of overseeing these funds. A very quick market update on slide 9. As the council knows, interest rates are at historic lows. Continues to be a favorable borrowing environment for highly rated municipal entities, especially. I think to the council's point, it is a good time to look at our capital projects and plans and refinance debt. We'll have a slide on our refinancing plans. But we're expecting rates to hold for the next couple years at these historic lows. So something we should be looking at now and certainly planning to take advantage of if those rates do hold out. And with that, Sarah will take again slide 21 to talk a little bit about our 2021 plans.
Yes, so this is the 2021 debt strategy. You'll see this again in January when we bring forward our preliminary debt strategy resolution. On here, you'll note the 11 million for CIB as well as the 12.5 there for street reconstruction bonds. Additionally, we always finance GO capital notes for police and fire vehicles. And then we also always annually do 8 million for sewer projects. The new thing listed here is our water revenue bonds. This is the first tranche that we'll be issuing next year for the St. Paul Regional Water Services McCarran's water treatment plant process. And so moving forward, you will see additional tranches of bonds moving forward. The bottom section here is the Ford redevelopment site bond issuances. The second column there is what we plan to issue in 2021, followed by what we issued this year in 2020, and then the total budgeted authorization in the fourth column with the remaining authorization at the end there. The important thing to note for Ford here is that only those GO CIB bonds will be repaid with property taxes. But this is just kind of an update on where we're at with Ford, and we are issuing on a cash flow basis, so kind of as the funds are needed. Next slide, please. And to point at Mike's refinancing conversation, these are the bonds that we are monitoring for refinancing in 2021. The first half are all of the bonds that are currently callable. One thing we didn't touch too much on is that advance refundings were taken away with the tax bill back in, I believe it was 2016 or 2017. And so unless we were to switch tax status, basically we need to wait until the bonds are callable. And so that top half are the ones that we're going to be refunding next year. Currently, it's estimated to have savings of roughly $4 million over the life of the bond. So you won't see that just in 2021. It's over the life of the bonds. Once we refinance them, we'll be able to give you the amount that we'll be able to save annually. The bottom portion are the bonds that will not be callable next year. So these will bonds that we are monitoring closely and most likely will refinance in 2022 or 2023. And with that, next slide, we can take any additional questions you may have.
Are there questions for Ms. Brown or Mr. Solomon? Ms. Naker.
Thank you, Council President. Thanks for this presentation. Always really appreciate all this information. I guess I'm just wondering, and this might be more of a question to my colleagues, but also to you both, how, if we did want to do that analysis and issue additional debt for specifically street reconstruction this year, I'm just trying to remember the timing. You know, we're setting our budget now, but obviously there's this debt strategy for 2021. You come back in January to talk about when debt is actually going to be issued. So what's our role in the budgeting process in terms of determining how much can be issued? And Mr. Solomon, to your point about that analysis, I mean, how long does that take? Is that something that we could actually realistically try to do at our next opportunity of issuing bonds?
Yeah, Council President Bremo and Councilmember Naker, I think it's an important question. I know there was some interest in having Public Works do a policy session on the 5-year street plan. And if not, I know Ms. Brown and the department are working hard on getting together the 5-year street reconstruction plan details to bring forward to the council. We really did want to bake that into the budget process for this year, and so that's still a goal, but could fall to early 2021 if we are looking to take advantage of that. So I'm not sure if we're going to have a policy session on it or be able to bring you that ahead of time, but it's something we can certainly look at. And then, I mean, the question I would have back to the council is, what is the appetite for a levy increase that we could model against for 2022 and ongoing, and we could bring that back to the administration and see if there's an appetite. But really, it's about what source we would have to repay to figure out what amount we could finance.
I think in part response to that, we have in conversations with Mr. Kershaw, there is an interest and appetite in having a larger policy session about the 5-year street plan and overall projects in Public Works. I think that, and I also hear you saying that we'd like to go to the best practice of including the 5-year street plan in as we vote here at the end of the year. So we'll navigate that in a way that it makes the most sense, especially if, obviously if it's attached to a levy increase, it's going to have to be a next year conversation anyway. But that is a conversation that's underway because I'm concerned that I'm seeing some of the the SPS, whatever it is now, formerly FKA RSVP projects getting kicked back further. And so I want to make sure we do that. But I know Mr. Kershaw is anxious to have a conversation with us about, with the update about the PCI and decision-making processes and what have you. But again, like kind of navigating what we can do right now and where we can have a more robust conversation. So we will definitely follow up with that. I see Ms. Prince has a hand up.
My mute. Thank you, Council President. Thanks to my colleague, Ms. Naker, for the really insightful questions. When we're getting this presentation on debt, my brain is really working hard. It feels really clenched right now. And I want to thank Mr. Solomon and Ms. Brown for a presentation where they made this very accessible. So thanks for that. And also, I feel a really high level of confidence that even to the point of Mr. Solomon mentioning that Minneapolis is looking at a negative outlook, but that the rating agencies are giving us some positive vibes on where we sit right now. So in a terrible year, that's a good message to get. And I also want to say to my colleagues, I appreciate your thinking about increasing the $12.5 million because it is critically important. And it does represent, as Council President Brenmoen said, a lower investment each in what we're able to do. So with the interest rates being as low as they are, I hope that we can move that discussion forward as soon as possible.
And Ms. Prince, earlier I said I had a question that I was going to maybe ask, and per your comments, I just want to throw this out to Mr. Solomon or Ms. Brown, but Minneapolis is in a different situation than St. Paul is. Can you just very briefly kind of talk about why they're in a different boat than St. Paul? In some ways, we know that our tax system is challenging because of our capital cities, because we have so many nonprofits and so on. Minneapolis's taxing situation is challenging for different reasons. And maybe if you could just lightly touch on kind of why we're at two different places.
Yes, certainly, Council President Brenmoen. As you noted, we're in different places. We have different problems and different kind of solutions to our problems. Minneapolis notably has adopted a council budget amendment for 2020 that involved a pretty significant use of their fund balance. We talked about our issuance of revenue debt. They issue a lot of geo debt, for instance, for their sales tax credit. They have general fund support for their convention center. And I think as discussed on the sales tax call, they have a little bit more concentration in that sales tax due to the downtown entertainment districts that are specific to that tax. So I think for a lot of reasons, they've just had more stress on their general fund. And for a general obligation rating, that's kind of what the rating agencies are looking at. I think looking at the 2021 budget proposal, the rating agency was very impressed to see the mayor's proposed 0% levy increase, noting affordability for our residents at these times, as well as the zero budgeted use of fund balance in the general fund. So those were kind of two positives, just looking at the proposal, knowing that we had the council process to get through. So it was a very preliminary conversation, but we did get some positive feedback at that point.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. Ms. Naker.
Thanks. Just a very quick follow-up, Council President, to what you said earlier, Mr. Solomon, about maybe the process for starting the conversation about higher debt issuance. I appreciate the question about how much we'd be willing to levy to cover that debt, and I understand that we need to pay back what we borrow. But I think I would sort of turn the question around a little bit and just ask, it would be helpful to know how much how much of an increase in debt would correspond to what kind of an increase in the levy. Because what I hear from my constituents is we don't like paying higher taxes, but if we're going to pay higher taxes, we want to pay higher taxes that are high enough that they get the work done, right? And people are starting to notice that the work isn't getting done, and that probably has a lot to do with the fact, as Council President mentioned, that we haven't increased the amount that we've been issuing in street debt since about when I graduated from college. So I think it would be helpful to just have some scenarios where we can tell, okay, how much of an increase would go to cover how much, not just how much money, but also how much work from Public Works' standpoint. So maybe this is a joint conversation.
Yeah, Council President Bremo and Councilmember Naker, sure thing. I hear you loud and clear. We can certainly work on some different scenarios that would effectively, add another line here that would say additional property taxes for X amount of street reconstruction bonds and what that would mean for the future and for this model. So we can definitely put that together in partnership with Public Works. I think their capacity on the work side is important too. So point taken.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we have further conversations, obviously, in the mix on this topic and how it plays out into different departments. But it looks like we've run out of questions at the moment for your crew there. So I think I will take the opportunity to shift gears and move over to the Office of Financial Empowerment, just given that it is already 11 o'clock. So thank you so much, Ms. Brown. Mr. Solomon, for your presentation, the work that you did preparing, as Ms. Prince pointed out, such a digestible and informative presentation for us. It is a lot to take in, and you always make it something that we can, news we can use. So I really, really appreciate that. All right, so thank you so much. So we are now shifting gears to Munir Karcher-Ramos, who is going to give us an update on OFE. Welcome, Munir.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you, Council members. Happy to be here, and I'll cruise through. And as you have questions, I'm available to answer them. So to jump straight in, Office of Financial Empowerment. We are a small but mighty budget. We actually have a lot more in the special fund from philanthropic dollars, state funds, that sort of thing. But as we look at year-over-year changes between the 2020 and the 2021 general fund budget, we do see about the 11% reduction from 2020 to 2021, about 60,000, and the details are there below. So in 2020, as a result of COVID-19 and revenue reductions, we did shift about $30,000 away from our banking to unbanked strategy. Some of you may be aware that we did actually get that off and going before COVID hit. We did some pop-up mobile bank branches within our libraries, and then had been working with Ramsey County on a number of things, and eventually needed to abandon that strategy as a result of COVID. And then the second reduction is connected to the College Bound St. Paul database expenses. So we shifted those dollars that were for 2021 into some of our philanthropic sources. So our 2021 budget will be just shy of $500,000, which mostly is going toward staffing. As we look at sort of another part of the financial picture on the revenue side for the Office of Financial Empowerment, you'll see 2021 we have about $2.78 million. That is allocated from a number of different revenue streams, a couple state revenue streams, as well as from philanthropy. As we look to our 2020, type of milestones, as you know, the first, the office was launched in March 2019. And then we saw a number of things happen so far in 2020. Including the launch of College Bound St. Paul, the passage of the Tenant Protection Ordinance. We applied for and joined 2 different fines and fee justice cohorts, a part of maybe 15 different cities between the 2 cohorts. Most recently, we also received a grant to do some planning around consumer financial protection. We launched, the People's Prosperity Pilot. We did a lot of speaking sort of in the regional and national sort of landscape around the work that we're doing here in the city. and then had over 50 highlights in local, regional, and national types of media and publications, so far in 2020. So we've been up to a lot. We've been moving a lot, and huge kudos to our small but mighty team, who has really been grinding out the work here and sort of looking at what are the ways that we can impact financial security and community wealth building, for individual residents here in the city of St. Paul. So we think about our COVID-19 response. We played a couple of different roles. One is we continue to facilitate the city food security work group. Part of that is that we worked with our park and rec sites, community partners, and Youth Prize to launch 6 sites that are distributing meals weekly. Right now, since May, we've distributed nearly 700,000 meals through park and rec sites and community sites. And have secured $400,000, in outside funding to support those meal distributions. 2, we played the liaison role of the St. Paul Public Schools in sort of the early months of the COVID-19 response. 3rd, is we were really support in the program development and implementation of the Family Bridge Fund. So that was 1,251 individuals who received $1,000 to support them in their COVID response. And then we launched Neighbors Helping Neighbors, which was volunteer coordination. So we had a Vista who was leading that work. Recently, actually here in October, we did a social media campaign on consumer financial protection. Thank you to the number of council members in particular who boosted a number of these social media posts, but we really focused on COVID scam and fraud that existed both in this state, but specifically, in St. Paul. And these are just a few of the screenshots, from that social media campaign, which range from contact tracing, scams to, whole number of online scams, that exist and, that sort of thing. So we've actually struck a partnership with the federal FTC as well as the Better Business Bureau, and looking forward to continuing to build out that partnership, as we move along. In 2021, where we headed, continuing with College Bound St. Paul, as of right now, we have around 2,500 babies that are enrolled since January 1 in the program, and we'll continue, obviously, enrolling babies in that program. The People's Prosperity Pilot will continue on throughout and beyond 2021. The Tenant Protection Ordinance, which we're actually to spend, time today, talking about and sort of the fiscal note on that. That goes into effect March 1st. The council passed that in July. We will continue down the route of our fines and fee justice work, particularly on towing and impound lots and criminal justice. So we're actually working a lot with police and public works on towing and impound lot sort of pilots around snow emergencies, coming up this season. And then the criminal justice reforms, we're actually working a lot with the city attorney's office on looking with the criminal division in particular around continuous for dismissals and a number of other things that we can update, the council on. But it's really around how do we keep dollars, in residents' pockets and not look at it as sort of a revenue, generator, but, ways that we can, advance fines and fee justice. And then the last is consumer financial protection. We just talked about some of the scam and kind of fraud awareness and education that's been done. We're also looking at other, fending off other types of predatory practices, particularly in immigrant and refugee communities. So we're actually partnering with Edmundo and CAO and exploring different consumer financial protection strategies. With that said, I'll take a pause there and see what questions you have about OFE before we jump into the broader fiscal note.
And I'm going to just jump in and share on the last screen that I've historically, the Office of the Minnesota Attorney General has been fantastic with financial protection and consumer protection. And if we are not already doing so, be sure to partner with that state organization on that work. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. And the other thing that they're very good about doing is translating their materials into multiple languages, and again, at their expense, something we don't need to add to our line. If the goal is just to get that word out and to identify issues, they have been just historically leaders in that field and department. I also see Mr. Tao has a question. Mr. Tao. I do see that your mute is on, Mr. Tao.
Thank you, Council President. Monier, thank you for your presentation and update. I think that it's. I want to recognize you for your leadership and your team to be able to leverage so much money to help with the programs that you are creating and implementing. So I think that's worth acknowledging. I'm just curious for like a long term. What happens? Do you have an idea of a plan in place once those funds runs out?
Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Tao. So, I mean, I think that as we look at the future forecast, of the city's budget and, knowing that 2021 isn't, the year for any type of levy increase and that sort of thing, we, would in the future be looking, obviously for, more general fund spending. I think that additionally that what we do know about, the funding that we have for, College Bound, St. Paul, for example, there's a fund for the future. So there's folks sort of externally, supporting and, looking at fundraising, for the program and that sort of thing. So, as I think about, the future and sort of revenue, would be likely an increase, request, for general funds, and then, continuing, fundraising as we move forward. And then to your question or your statement, Councilmember Brenmoen, is we have been working with the Attorney General's office. We've been working with actually the Department of Commerce does a lot of consumer financial protection. And then we've actually been talking a lot with federal agencies, particularly the Chicago office of the FTC, so Federal Trade Commission. And as we did sort of our landscape analysis as part of this planning grant, sort of unanimously across all the different groups, government agencies in particular, as well as the Better Business Bureau, everyone agreed that they don't have a good outreach, into particularly immigrant and refugee communities. And I think that in partnership with them and sort of the advisory that we've put together with that group has really sort of narrowed in on what is the unique role a city could play, in reaching out to immigrant and refugee communities. After Chicago, as you know, St. Paul is the second greatest proportion of population, demographic-wise, in the Midwest, with immigrants and refugees. So it seems a unique contribution that the city of St. Paul can make, particularly around predatory practices that are happening in refugee and immigrant communities in our city.
And I agree, and I obviously fully support that. I just sometimes I want to make sure that we don't continue to take on more without the requisite funds or support to do that work. We know it's important and we know it has to happen, and so just making sure. And it sounds like you're definitely networked in. So fully speaking in support and recognizing our niche here, but also, I think we say this often, like we can't wait for other entities to do this work, but there's a price tag attached to that as well. I more mentioning it that we're mindful of the costs and responsibilities of the things that we add to our plate. Mr. Tolbert. Mr. Tolbert, I believe you have your mute on.
Thank you. Yeah, I think what Council President Brenmoen brought up is a really important point. I think one of the things, and this isn't just the city of St. Paul, I think this is a Twin Cities and a Minnesota problem, and quite frankly, it's a good problem to have, but it's something that we also need to be conscious and considerate of is duplicative programs and multiple organizations, government agencies, or groups doing the same thing and not working together or working in silos. And I think that's important why the council president brought it up. I even thought, the College Bound St. Paul, which is a little bit different, but it's an important program. At the same time, it's almost as if the Power of You, which is one of the best programs that's come out of the St. Paul, Minneapolis in the past decades, has gotten forgotten about. And when we do these programs, not only do we need to further promote the Power of You, because it still exists, and for those who might not know, any St. Paul or public or Minneapolis graduate that qualifies by income can go to St. Paul College or MCTC for free if they keep the grade. And that's a program that is powerful and is financed and is working right now. But things like that, I think, are important, that we always make sure we're not reinventing the wheel. I know both my work in the affordable housing space as well as the workforce space, the first step we usually take when we're trying to organize is, let's make a list of all the organizations and government agencies that have programs on this, so that we're not being duplicative, or there's a way that we can make folks work together to save money, because there is limited resources in this world. And that kind of gets to my next point, and I think it's important that we start talking about, one of the concerns that we've had with OFE is taking on too much, and it's not because the work isn't good, but it's because it's not a huge department, and every time we take on another responsibility, it means more funding potentially, and that's kind of what I think Councilmember Tao's question was really important, because we need to start, quite frankly, this proposal today for $500,000 for tenant protection implementation is a huge surprise to me, based on all the meetings that we had over the last 9 months. Nowhere near was that amount mentioned, and considering the conversation we had for funding for implementation of 15, which was minuscule, it is a very surprising ask. So could you maybe talk a little bit more about how we got to a $500,000 implementation for tenant protections in the last 90 days? And also what other tails we're going to have. I mean, I know Councilmember Naker brought it up at the time, and I think I did as well, with the supplemental income program that we've passed and OFE taking it on. Is this going to have additional staff costs and things like that? And this tenant protections additional cost makes me very worried about that program too. And not that they aren't good programs, but we need to have these fiscal notes, especially this year, when programs that we care about are potentially not going to be funded unless we find resources for them. So if you could talk about that.
Great. Council President Brent Moen, Councilmember Tolbert, if it's fine, maybe I'll just go through the tenant protections ordinance fiscal note here, which will then unpack that, and then I can also address how we're thinking about staffing and that sort of thing.
I think that works.
Perfect. So again, in July, we passed, the Safe Housing St. Paul, the tenant protections ordinance, and part of that was to report back to the City Council 90 days after passage. So it got tucked into our OFE's budget presentation. So in big picture, as we think about implementation goals, we're looking first to focus on education awareness with intent for compliance before enforcement. So what that really means is that, in year one, it's going to be a lot of education awareness and ensuring, that different property managers, landlords, tenants, understand, what is the tenant protection ordinance, and that the intention is to have compliance, before some sort of punitive type of enforcement. 2 is we want to have informed landlords, and protected tenants. And then 3, be accountable to the legal requirements, obviously, of the ordinance. To that end, I've been using the implementation science framework for probably about a decade now, particularly when I was an evaluator for Minnesota Department of Education, Minnesota Department of Human Services, and really is looking at it as a policy implementation cycle, kind of a 2 to 4 year cycle. And what you'll see in here is sort of we're in the installation and initial implementation mode of this, and really what this is getting beneath to is what are the key implementation drivers that need to be in place for successful implementation, of a particular policy or program. And those implementation drivers can range from technology to staffing to community awareness to community embeddedness to the community infrastructure to the financial resources, that sort of thing. And that the assumption, and not even an assumption, the science plays out, is that if you have the right implementation drivers in and are able to make the adaptations as you go along, is that you'll basically, practice is consistent. You'll be producing the type of positive outcomes that you're really looking for consistently down the road. So that's sort of the framework that we've been, thinking about and using. So what does that actually look like in practice? So key implementation drivers in place. So staffing for multi-department coordination and customer service support for landlords and tenants. 2 and that would be OFE, fair housing testing and staffing for investigations with HERO. Staffing for facilitating preservation strategies connected to advance notice of sale, which is PED. And then the third, or the last one, is technology for the advance notice of sale. So this would actually be submitting, property owners, submitting their advance notice that they're going to be selling their property, and on the other end would be submitting that the property has actually been sold. So that would be built into the city website. Part of all of this work on the implementation sort of drivers and that work is that we've done implementation mapping with OFE, HERO, PED, DSI, OTC, as we sort of crafted out what does it going to take to actually implement, the different policies or the policy provisions within the broader ordinance. That moves me to number 2, which is implementation looks like a multi-layered education awareness strategies that are both 1, leading up to, and then 2, during implementation. And then the third is understanding the impact and effectiveness, of the ordinance. So that would be external research and evaluation. So total implementation expenses just shy of $500,000 so far. The revenue sort of secured here, which would be within existing sort of staffing, structures or within some of the philanthropic sources, is about $350,000. And then what we're still looking to secure through the budget process, both in conversation with the administration and the council, is about $150,000. Yet. So what does that all actually translate into? Let me just pull up this budget spreadsheet, and then we'll get to Councilmember Tolbert's questions. Let me know when it's up, and I'll proceed.
It's up. It's up.
Perfect. So what you see in the budget spreadsheet, which was also in Legistar in advance of the meeting, is just to quickly give sort of the lay of the spreadsheet here is we did mapping with the different budget analysts who are part of each of these departments. So we have department, and then the line item in the pink column here is really the 2021. We did a multi-year fiscal note to look at what does it cost, in the out years. What is the total 5-year cost from 2020 to 2024? FTE impacts, is it currently included in the 2021 budget? And then what's the source of funding? And then is it a one-time or ongoing, expense? So I think for the sake of this conversation, I'll stick primarily on the 2021 budget. So in there, you'll see in the Office of Financial Empowerment, a budget of just shy of $250,000, of which 121 is actually Kristen Birch's time, on fair housing. And then 2 costs that are we still need to find the revenue source for, which would be the policy analysis and the evaluation. So this would be that multi-year study that the council included in the ordinance. The second is $75,000 for the tenant and landlord sort of marketing, mailing, kind of social media part of the broader sort of education and awareness campaign. So that's additionally what we're need to determine where we're going to get that revenue source. Other things in here, would be around, the designing of the packet and poster. We have something on the landlord, training and education, which philanthropy stepped in on, those sort of things. If you go beyond OFE, looking at PED, already included in their budget is two different, one project manager and a principal project manager, and this would be staffing for the advance notice, particularly on the preservation strategies. I would look at this as not necessarily in addition to, fully in addition to PED's budget, but supplementing some of their staff time that they have already, in their budget. So that's $182,000 there. And then for HERO, about $43,000, and this would be staffing for questions, complaints, investigations, ongoing costs for fair housing dashboard that's money's already been secured for, and then fair housing testing. So this would be actually doing some of the market testing there. You can see the different kind of revenue streams there. And then the multi-department budget is one-time expense for $23,000 to do the build-out for the technology for the advance notice. And we're still looking to identify the revenue source at this time. So again, it comes up to $498,000. You can see the revenue sort of breakdown of where those dollars are coming from. And that still need to secure, 148 through the budget process, or we would make decisions if that funding is not available, what we would need to cut. So that is sort of where the fiscal note is coming from.
Great, thank you. I do see a few questions. Ms. Prince and then Ms. Naker.
Thank you, Council President Brandmon. I share Councilmember Tolbert's concern about this. We passed the tenant protection ordinance in July. These expenses, you may not have been able to do all the analysis, but it makes no sense to me that these were not part of the mayor's proposed budget. The $23,000 for PED to do the 90-day notice of sale monitoring, we talked about that during the discussion about the ordinance. How much is it going to cost? I specifically asked Ms. Shookman if bringing the number of units down to one, having it be all affordable units would have a 90-day notice of sale, that would be considerably increasing the universe, but they weren't concerned about how that would be handled. The study, I'm not buying that these were council changes to the tenant protection ordinance that we as the council are now responsible to come up with the money for. I mean, this absolutely should have been incorporated as contingency planning into the mayor's proposed budget. And the $75,000 for outreach to landlords should have absolutely been something that was planned going into the mayor's budget. So I'm not getting that, and I do just want to touch back on another thing that Mr. Tolbert said, that when OFE was created, this was something that I very specifically asked about, is how a small staff in City Hall was going to be able to make a significant dent in this enormous issue of connecting people to social services. And it was made clear to me at that point, and it was one of the reasons I could support it, that that the job of OFE was connecting people to the network and not being the service provider. So in any event, I have some concerns, but to come to us at this stage of the budget process with a $150 price tag to be able to implement the tenant protection ordinance is really, really inappropriate.
Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Prince, we were following the timeline, of the 90 days, that was, in the ordinance, and, worked very hard, across departments to, identify all, the different costs and, did the implementation mapping and, worked with, the budget analysts, to, come up with where we were. I think that a number of things, were included, in, the staffing side of, of the ordinance. And, I think that where, things looked at sort of the end of this as we, put this together is this is, the $148,000 is where we're at. And I think that with the administration, we're looking, with the council to figure out, how we close that, and, the reality of the fiscal note is, the reality of the fiscal note within sort of our current, context. And, we're willing to try to figure out as much as we can. And, what can the city offer here? What can we go to philanthropy for? I think there's a number of different options here as we're looking to, advance this and move it forward. I think to your point on, the social services, the Office of Financial Empowerment isn't getting into, housing social services, and we are connecting folks, to different, types of providers and that sort of thing. And I think with our tenant, landlord, rights and responsibilities, information packet as part of this ordinance, that'll also be one of our, contributions. But I know our team is very careful about, not taking on any of the housing, social service sides of things as well.
Thank you, Mr. Karcheramus. And I know you're in a really tough position. I mean, this is definitely not personal. I simply believe it should have been made part of the budget. I will also say, again, to touch on something that Councilmember Tolbert said, when we have passed, and this is a message to the administration, when we have passed huge ordinances that are very important, but are that go far beyond the city's traditional role, whether it's tenant protection ordinances and then labor standards ordinances, earned sick and safe leave, and the $15 minimum wage. We need to do that as a council with a commitment, or the administration needs to support us with a commitment that they are going to adequately staff these efforts. And that simply has not happened. And I did talk about that during the tenant protection ordinance, that I felt that this was a huge role for Ms. Birch to be taking on her own, that it really, to do it effectively, to reach all the landlords, I think it's just a tremendous expectation to put on a single staff person. When it comes to the $15 minimum wage, we're now 2 staff people down from where we were. So I just want to say clearly to the administration that if you're going to support these efforts, if you're going to have the city go into areas of endeavor that have not been its traditional role, you have to adequately fund them, or we're raising expectations in the community that we simply can't meet.
Thank you, Ms. Prince. I see Ms. Naker, then Mr. Tolbert, then Ms. Jalali.
Thanks, Council President, and thanks, Mr. Karcheramus, for the presentation. I To some extent, I share the concerns that my colleagues have raised, specifically about why there wasn't at least a placeholder, maybe not the details, but a placeholder in the mayor's budget for these expenses. But at the same time, I want to point out that this is the most detailed fiscal note I've ever seen on my time on the council. And I want to applaud you for that. I don't want to critique you for that, because policies have costs, as we often talk about, as Ms. Prince, you just mentioned, and they have consequences. And I want to encourage you and all members of the administration to share with us transparently, as you're doing today, what those costs will be. Not to encourage you, based on this conversation, to sort of hide those or obfuscate them in any way. I mean, this is the kind of thing, when we pass policies, I'm often asked by my constituents, how much is this going to cost? Do you have a fiscal note? And I often say, no. I mean, we never have had this. And I think what we need to work on here is the timing. I mean, trying to find a way to get this kind of fiscal note teed up when we're passing the policy, so we're having a conversation that's more informed by the context of how much it will cost. Not that how much it costs is the only factor we need to consider, but it is one of them. Rather than, having it happen further along the way, being able to try to make those decisions with this information in mind. But again, I am I'm committed to finding the dollars that you need. I really appreciate the way that you've highlighted all the costs that are already borne by other departments that aren't new costs, but they're staff time that is going to be taken to meet the needs of the tenant protection ordinance. And again, I think we need to fund fully the policies that we pass. Otherwise, they don't have an impact. So I appreciate this transparency.
Thank you, Ms. Naker. Mr. Tolbert and then Ms. Jalali. Mr. Tolbert, I believe you have your mute on.
I'm struggling. I said I wanted to agree with what Councilmember Naker just said. This is probably the most advanced fiscal note that we've seen, and it is a good fiscal note. However, it is very late because to be honest, I'm very surprised to not only see a request for money, but to see a request this large, $500,000 to fund it. I went back this morning and watched, skimmed through the videos of us talking about the cost of this. And just in my scanning of it, I asked about funding very closely. Councilmember Naker asked about funding closely. Council President Brenmoen did. Councilmember Tao, Councilmember Prince, and I'm guessing others did too. But those were the ones that I heard speak about. I would recommend that staff goes and reads those. The reason that I bring that up is because the impression that was left with me is, yeah, there could be some additional costs, but they were fairly de minimis, and which surprised me at the time because I actually think this implementation is a bigger undertaking than the $15 minimum wage undertaking because we don't have the benefits of most employers being on computer systems that can just change the amount that they're paying through their payroll and the deed connection. We have a lot of individual operators in this thing. So I'm guessing the money is justified because we do need to reach a lot of independent operators and a lot of operators who, landlords who are, you probably have English as a second language or may not speak English at all. Or just don't have the infrastructure in place. However, it is very surprising because I got left with the impression that this wasn't going to be a huge cost, that it was basically going to be able to be handled in-house at OFE, and that's the impression that I was left with. I think, and I haven't brought this up in years because it didn't seem to get any traction, but the state of Minnesota does have fiscal notes that were required with every piece of legislation. And at this point, especially with these big ones, I think just for the future, we have to require these with the ordinance going through. Because this is, like I said, this is just a big surprise. It's not surprising because, like I said, I think this is probably what it's going to cost to implement this. But I don't know if it was being coy or being hopeful, but it was not how it was presented as implementation, because the conversation that we had was about implementation in March, if that was possible, because of the difficulty of implementing such a sophisticated thing so early and the costs about it. And yeah, it's very surprising and disappointing that we are being told this now. And I'm glad that we required the 90-day return, because I suspect we wouldn't have been given this notice but for putting that in the ordinance. And so I think the lesson for us going into the future is not only on big ordinances do we need, and particularly new programs that are being created. And I know it's more fun to start a new program than expand an existing one, but we need to put fiscal notes in, and we also need to, I think, continue to require these report backs to the council so that we can actually find out this information, because I suspect if we hadn't put that in there, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now.
Thank you, Mr. Tolbert. I do see, and since lots of people have their hands up, I'm going through to get through our questions. I think that a lot of our colleagues have made statements. And if there are particular questions that I'm missing, please feel free to put your hand back up, but I wanted to make sure that folks were able to provide feedback to Mr. Karcher-Ramos, which I would also like to interject and just say, I appreciate the heavy lifting here of bringing all of this to one place where we can look at it. It is spread out through different departments, but it's hard to digest that if we were getting it in pieces and parts throughout our budget process. So you are the lightning rod, and we appreciate your taking that role here in the work that you've done to get us this information. So I see Ms. Jalali has a hand up.
Thanks. There's a lot to track and follow here. I guess my short comment would be that we did pass this July, I think 10th, and then the mayor's office had been for weeks developing a budget. I can understand the tension between wanting to put like a placeholder that might not be accurate with what was known at the time versus putting nothing, knowing there would be a report back. I do understand and empathize with folks' reactions about what we are seeing that it would cost. I do think the kind of growing consensus I'm hearing about people understanding it will be more to implement the minimum wage, that it will require more resource. It's over half of our residents, and then it's all the landlords that rent to them. It is going to require more resource. So as we dig into the details, again, thank you for providing so many details. I am certainly committed to figuring out how we do this and bring some costs down and also like find other sources. But I do think that one thing that would have assisted with having more time and more awareness was actually finalizing the ordinance sooner, and was fighting the whole way to be able to get to people's questions, concerns, and resolutions and actually begin implementation work. We did have a role in compressing the timeline. I am very grateful that we were able to pass a strong ordinance. I am grateful that we weathered the storm of the pandemic and the procedural delays, that we have a really strong ordinance. All of that is something everyone here has played a role in, but I also want to remind folks that that is a part of the turnaround. My question is that in part of the time too, those same 3 months where you've been working all this out, you stood up the TPIC. You put together the Tenant Protections Implementation Committee. At a high level, everything I've heard to this date is that the desire is for this group to really, really helm outreach and education. And it seems to me we have a very committed group of folks willing to begin that work. I'd like to get a little short preview, if you will, of what exactly they'll be doing and how we can cost effectively do a lot of the front end outreach with this committee of folks who are committed to just making sure people understand the ordinance and disseminating information. I do think that, like with everything else that we implement, front end education is a huge, huge asset. We had that philosophy with minimum wage. We have that philosophy in general. So can you speak a little more to that and how that might be able to, do you see that being able to reduce some of the anticipated costs that we see here? Like, what's the opportunity to help work on it from both ends?
Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Jalali. So the Tenant Protection Implementation Committee has met. There's 3 work groups within that 18-member committee that's made of all different size property managers, landlords, both in the private market as well as in the nonprofit sphere. There are tenants, renters, at the table. There are folks who have been fully for the ordinance, and those who have been, had resistance, to the ordinance, who are all at the table figuring out what does this look like. So the 3 groups, one is the Tenant the tenant and landlord education and awareness work group. The second is the Just Cause work group, and then the third is the tenant screening work group. And with the education work group, I mean, we're just getting going, but what we are looking at are low cost, no cost solutions, on education and awareness. That would include, like we saw in Minneapolis, there are a number of organizations from the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association to Homeline to others sort of in the space who are hosting online sort of webinars and that sort of thing, in addition to what the city of Minneapolis was doing. So we would plan something like that. I think that as we look at the marketing and awareness budget, it's a one-time expense at $75,000. I think that most of that will be needed. I think that it may be a place that we could optimize costs through community infrastructure and education and awareness, and still get done what we need to get done to make sure that we feel that tenants and landlords are fully informed. So there's a number of strategies within that group that are currently being built out, and their philanthropy has also supported, that project in terms of building out, modules and, information, sharing that any tenant or landlord could access, from the city website, at any time, and, that sort of thing. So we are, piecing the different pieces together here. One of the things you'll see in, it says like C note or something like that, is that there are things in, that philanthropy is not funding the city for, but is also funding out in the community-based organizations for around, awareness and, education that aren't captured, in this fiscal note because it's not connected directly to the city. So there are multiple strategies around, education awareness, and we may be able to optimize on some of the marketing education awareness costs.
Well, I look forward to continuing to shape that, and I appreciate some of your high-level thoughts. I think this is something we should all dig into to figure out how to make everything balance out. So thanks. I'll give time back for folks.
Thank you, Ms. Jalali. And what I'm hearing is there's still 148,000 you're looking for full implementation, that there is opportunities to find partners to help us do this work, and also opportunities to trim back some of the work if we can't reach that budget goal. I mean, we all know that we have a very challenging year for budget, also something that wasn't anticipated initially with the work that we're doing here. So I feel like folks have had an opportunity to share thoughts and feedback on this, and I'm looking to see if anyone else has their hand up. We also, obviously, there's a lot to digest here, a lot of information, and we may have questions that come up, in the coming week or so, and we will work through Ms. Houston to direct those questions to you and get answers back to the council. But that said, I sincerely appreciate the work to put your presentation together here today. We ended up speaking mostly about the tenant protection ordinance, although there was a lot of dense material as well that was presented, and I know it takes a lot of work. I think that you in particular stand out in presenting materials that we can all really understand, and I appreciate that so much. So with that, I think we will thank you for your presentation, and again, follow up with you in the weeks ahead as we lead into a final vote on our budget. So thank you so much, Mr. Karcher-Ramos. We appreciate your work here very much.
Thanks for having me.
Right on. All right, so it is 11:48, folks, and we have reached the end of our Budget Committee agenda. We have lots more work today in front of us, but for now, if there are no questions from my colleagues, looks like there's none, then we will be adjourned. Thank you very much. See you later.
investment in these businesses and in these communities. It's not about a moment. It's